Good evening. My name is Tarek, and I'm a leadership trainer with Gulf Coast Coaching. So first off, I just want to start by saying thank you to Selma and Leo. If you guys have not met Selma and Leo, who are the owners here of Fish Ale, please make sure you introduce yourself to them. They're awesome people, good food, great service, and great beer. So thank you to them. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit tonight about fear, okay, and a tool that you can use to help overcome fear, and something that can just help you to get unstuck, whether it's in business or in your own personal lives. So fear exists for everybody. It's a naturally occurring human phenomenon, way of being, emotion. How many of you have ever experienced fear in your life before? Okay, right? And how many of you know what the number one fear of humans is? Public speaking, all right. And how many here are nervous, anxious, or have some degree of fear when it comes to standing up in front of people? Okay. Would somebody be willing to work with me eventually? I won't have you come up, but would somebody be willing to work with me through my exercise as we go forward? Thank you. And your name, sir? Philip. Philip, great. Thanks, Philip. All right, so fear exists, and sometimes we can do something about it. Sometimes we feel totally hampered and strapped to be able to take action despite the fear, right? Fear comes from some place, and we know we can figure out where it comes from. So I'm going to draw a couple of circles, and then I'll come back over there. All right, 2 circles. So here's your tool. First circle, it says what happens or what happened. Second circle is the interpretation. Something happens in our life. Our mind subconsciously creates an interpretation of that event. All right? And what the mind does, it creates an interpretation about yourself. It may create an interpretation about somebody who's also involved in that particular event that happens. It may also create an interpretation of the world at large, or society, or your organization, whatever it may be, okay? And because oftentimes we don't always have control over our subconscious, so we may be completely unaware of what that interpretation actually is. So I'm going to give you an example to kind of make this all make sense for you. When I was about 8 years old, something happened. I had finished my homework one evening and went to go to show my father that I had finished my French homework. But I also had, so I had the paper in one hand and I had a pencil in the other hand. I run up to him, "Daddy, Daddy, I finished my homework." And he turns around and the sharp end of the pencil accidentally stabs him in the arm. Okay, it was an accident, right? Didn't do it on purpose. But his reaction in that moment was yelling at me, screaming at me, and sending me to my room. Now I'm 8 years old. What do you think my reaction was? Right? I start crying, I go upstairs, go to my room, do as I'm told, right? But, so I had that event that happened. In that moment, I accidentally stabbed him. His reaction of yelling at me, and therefore my subconscious created an interpretation of what just happened. Now, I wasn't aware of this interpretation until much later in life. When I got to about 21, 22, senior year in college, my father came out and had lunch with me on a regular basis. And, you know, because I had spent my junior year abroad, we didn't see much of each other. And whenever we'd go out to lunch, you know, we'd try and have a conversation, and he'd ask me, you know, personal questions, how things are going, but I'd always keep them very short answered. You know, how you doing? Good. How's classes? Fine. You doing well in school? Yeah. All right. But I always wanted to share more. It was always on the tip of my tongue. I always had more to say in my mind, but I had this uncomfortableness and this fear of actually sharing more with him. I didn't know where that came from, but I recognized that it was a problem for me. It wasn't until 8 years later when I was 29 that somebody showed this tool to me and took me through the exercise, had me go back in time to really try and figure out where did my fear and my anxiousness in communicating with my father come from. So I had to think back, finally came to the point where at 8 years old, I accidentally stabbed him with a pencil. He sent me to my room, and my mind created an interpretation of, if I share with him, he's going to yell at me. So from that point forward, I lived inside of that interpretation as if it were real. It was real to me, and I could feel it, because I could feel the fear and feel the anxiousness in wanting to share with him. Same thing when it comes to public speaking. When I was about 10, I was in a school play, and I forgot my line. And I got embarrassed. I mean, nobody laughed, nobody snickered or anything, but I created the embarrassment for myself because I forgot my line. And from that day forward, whenever I used to get up and want to speak to my peers or to a small group, my hands would get clammy, my mouth would get dry, and my stomach was in knots. But again, it wasn't until I was able to understand that my mind created a false interpretation of the fact that I forgot my lines at 10 years old. And again, I was living inside of this reality, but that really wasn't real. Okay? Philip, so you have a bit of fear of public speaking. No? Oh, okay.
I was one of the 4 people who didn't raise their hand.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand. So I need a volunteer who does have a bit of a fear.
I have a fear of rejection.
A fear of rejection. Okay. No, but it doesn't have to be a fear of public speaking. It can be a fear of anything, right? So I'll just ask you to think back to a time, and it's usually when we're young, okay? To think back to a time when you experienced a moment of rejection.
No, I was making a play on the fact you just turned me down as your volunteer. Sorry.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. Anybody else want to volunteer?
I'll go ahead and
No?
volunteer.
Awesome. Thank you, Jimmy. Fear of what? Or anxiousness about something?
Public speaking.
Public speaking. All right. Can you think back to a time when you were younger, when you had to get up in front of a group and just something happened? Something that, when you think back now, may have been a big embarrassment or failure.
The first problem I had was I didn't speak English. Spanish was my first language. So to come to the United States and to learn to speak English, I was made fun of. As a matter of fact, I was looked at differently.
Okay.
Very different.
Right. So the what happened was, can you think of a particular incident where somebody said something to you?
I was getting beat up all the time.
Jeez. Man. Forget verbal abuse, okay? Right. Well, so think back now, just at that age, you know, what would you have said to yourself that would have put a block in?
What happened, I'll tell you the incident that took place. Not that I share this with everybody. I had this big kid. His name was Paul Averill. I don't know if you guys remember Paul Averill. He's a sheriff now. He fell on top of me, and he took all the air out of me, and I was like, this wasn't bad. I survived. I can do this. And so after he fell on top of me, and I was like, you know, I'm still walking, I'm good. And that somewhat changed me to be capable of taking care of myself, but it still was not capable of changing mentally to be able to stand out and speak to everyone, because I always remember people making fun of me.
Right. So you had the experience of being made fun of, and subconsciously, you know, we don't want to get made fun of. We don't like being made fun of. If you have that understanding that every time you stand up, you're going to get made fun of, who's going to want to do that, right? Looking back today, can you see how that interpretation had created that block for you to be able to stand up in front of your groups, in front of your groups?
Absolutely.
Great. Now that he gets that today, okay, the great thing is we have a choice. We have a choice as to whether or not, and Jimmy has a choice as to whether or not he's going to let that interfere with his ability to stand up in front of a group of people today? You have a choice. You can either hold on to that interpretation, okay, that your mind created back then, or you can say, I'm going to step out of that, and I'm going to stand up in front of a group of people, and I'm just going to talk to them because they're a good group of people. So you have the choice to let go of that interpretation and create something new for yourself. But the key is uncovering what that interpretation is in the first place. So hopefully you guys now have this tool that you guys can use for yourselves. When you're stuck, when you're just, something's not right, you can start to think back, okay, something from my past. Is there something from my past that my mind created that is a limiting belief, essentially? How many of you have heard of limiting beliefs before? Right? And a lot of them are self-imposed. Right? A lot of them are self-imposed. So if you can work to uncover what that self-imposed limiting belief is, you then have the power to choose, do I stay with this limiting belief, or am I going to let it go and create something more powerful for myself? So I know I got a couple more minutes, but any questions on that? How it's applied, how you can use it for yourselves, or? No? Great. Well, thank you guys again for your attention. Thank you for allowing me to come back up for a second time, and have a great night.